There is talk about whether relationships are hard. Is it worth it if it's not easy? And I don't know about other people, but I'm going to tell you why I say relationships aren't easy. And it's not to scare you, but to prepare you. I'm Angie, stick around with your girl and let's talk love. When I got married, I was 18 years old and I was extremely naive to the hardships of marriage. No matter how many people tried to come to me and counsel me and tell me that things are going to be challenging, you're young, you don't have a career, you don't have this, you don't have that. I was 18, young, and in love. But as a 34-year-old woman today, life and experience, what I lacked then, I have now, which is the wisdom. And wisdom to know that relationships aren't easy because, for starters, we aren't easy individuals and we make up the relationship, right? There are certain things about us that is just very challenging and human nature, right? Also, the main thing is sin. We all are sinful. We all have things that are wrong about us. And as long as we're in the flesh, we're always going to be dealing with that sin, which is not making us any easier. And so I was thinking about how they say relationships or marriage in this case, after 5 or 8 years, you get over that patch and it's smooth sailing from then. And that couldn't be farther from the truth, because whether you're 1 year in, 5 years in, 10, 20, 30 years in, there's always going to be something that comes up that challenges your marriage. Whether it's grief, whether it's financial woes, whether it's the job, you have to move, kids, whatever it is, something is going to come up to challenge your marriage and challenge and make it uneasy. And that's just life in general. All that comes with life. It gets better with time. Of course, I don't want to tell you that it doesn't get better with time. It does get better with time. But this generation never sees it because we don't want to endure. We don't want to fight for that good part. And we often hear relationship gurus, older generation, talk about these hardships and what makes relationships so challenging. But the real question is, why do they say that? And I wanted to share my top 10 reasons for why I say relationships aren't easy. The first thing that I want to talk about is doing the work within ourselves is easier said than done. There is work we all need, changes that we all need to make. Some of us are aware of those changes and some of us are not aware of those changes. And I think that's a fair statement to say. But it's not as easy to do. Why is this the case? Why are some people aware but still don't want to do the work to heal and change? I think mostly because it takes digging deep to make these changes. The traumas that we aren't ready to relive, the traumas that we aren't ready to talk about, it's easier to hide and protect that person that we once were than to deal with things head on. Some people also let their victim mentality and anger control how they heal. You know, too many times we find ourselves controlled by our anger, controlled by depression, controlled by unhappiness, controlled by frustrations that we kind of get in our own way. We hinder ourselves, our own selves, from progression. So that's partly why some people choose not to heal even though they are aware that they need to. Then you have people who pretend as if nothing has ever happened to them. They don't have any traumas. I often say that we all need therapy, and this is called flight. It's kind of, let's talk about something else. Nothing is wrong with my life. And what happens when you go through life pretending and putting on this facade is you never heal. You end up projecting, you end up bitter, you end up jealousy, and it might jealousy. You end up jealous, and it might not be on a high spectrum, but it will be on a low spectrum. And sometimes I feel like this can turn into narcissism. I have a family member that is like this. Nothing is wrong in her life. Everything is perfect. She has the perfect past. Occasionally she'll tell you a story about suffering and all this other stuff, but for the most part, her relationship is perfect. Everything is perfect. She hasn't done the therapy that she needs to truly heal from this trauma and live. And when you're a fake version of yourself, you're not truly living. You can pretend to be as content as you want to be, but you're not living your life and you're still bound. You're still in chains living that way. And I just want to say to people like this, get the help you need. We all need therapy. We all can use therapy. And I think it's essential that we remember that as we go, not just for relationships, but for ourselves, right? We matter. We need to make sure that we are doing what we can to be better individuals. Not just, like I said, not just for our partner, but for our future children, and mostly for ourselves. The second thing that I want to talk about is people tend to have their individual roles misconstrued. So a few months ago on my Instagram, I talked about and was discussing some objectives that women are supposed to be doing like men, like protect, provide, and produce and all that stuff. Like, we are not the only people that need to be providing. Women provide a safe place for their husband to come home to, just like they may provide financially for us, or whatever the case may be. And it's just in different ways. That's just it. You know, we provide, we protect, we produce in different ways, but both of us need to be doing that. And I often ask myself, why aren't we having these conversations when I'm seeing relationships these days and people dating? They're not having important conversations. They aren't asking what protection means to them. They aren't asking, how can I love you? Or how, you know, they're not telling how you can love me. They're not asking what makes you happy. Instead of asking questions, we make assumptions of what that person needs. The number one mistake that I see couples make is assuming that they know how to love a person instead of studying them and asking the questions that they need to learn what they need to learn about that person. Because think about it, when you first get into a relationship, you don't know this person. You don't know how to love them. Over time, you learn because you're watching behaviors, you're asking questions, you're doing all this stuff. So because of that, in the beginning, we need to be having honest and open conversations about what it is that we like in relationships, our expectations, our boundaries, all these things. And sometimes it's hard to do for some people. This is not all. Of course, there's an exception to every rule. But sometimes it's hard to do for some people because people genuinely don't know what they're looking for. They don't know what they want out of life, so they can't thoroughly express that to their partner. And so it just becomes this ongoing thing that you do in and out of relationships because you don't know exactly what you want from the relationship, and you can't, like I said, discuss that with your partner. My ultimate objective with this is to help you understand that you need to be discussing what you need and what you want out of a relationship. You need to be talking about your roles. You need to be asking questions to your partner. What matters most to you in a relationship? What will make you unhappy, etc. These are all things that you need to be discussing, plus a plethora of other things. The third thing that I want to talk about is, and you know why I say relationships aren't easy, is because people don't want to make sacrifices. This is a lazy generation, a generation that doesn't really trust who they are with. They don't really have faith in who they are with. And that's partly because they aren't building the proper foundation. So when they get into this relationship, it's nothing but disappointments and, you know, all the things that make us dislike a person or whatever the case may be. This is a generation that does not want to work. This is a generation that doesn't want to make time for their significant other. And I read a quote somewhere and it said, I think this generation is seeking a love that it can't give. I want to know your thoughts on this. Drop your thoughts below in the comments if you're watching on YouTube. Do you think this generation can't give that genuine love? I think it's not that we can't give it, we just don't want to. Everything is so accessible. So when person A gets on our nerves, we lack the patience and we go to person B. And so it just trickles over. And because we don't want to work, because we don't want to fight, we can't endure through those rough times. Relationships also aren't easy because sometimes you will have to challenge your partner. And for some, that's hard. To challenge your partner, you have to trust their perspective. And when I'm talking about challenging your partner, it's ultimately about not saying everything that they want to hear. Having a new way of thinking. Now, you don't want somebody that's just going to completely change your thinking, because that's control and manipulation, but you want somebody that's going to help you think outside the box, somebody that's going to challenge you to open your palette to something fresh. You know, somebody that is going to make you see things in a different light, experience things, and, you know, just all the things that you weren't doing before. This person should be able to enlighten you in some shape or form. And I think people have a hard time with this because, again, like I was saying, they don't trust who they're with. For somebody that's going through this, where you're having a hard time receiving challenges from your partner, it's probably because you don't trust their perspective. You may not have respect for them. So those are things that you want to monitor, to be able to take on challenges from your partner and hear constructive criticism that you may not want to hear. We all need a partner that's going to tell us about ourselves. And in this day and age, people do not want to hear about themselves. People only want to hear what is pleasing to their ears, what's going to keep them going in the direction that they want to go in. So just monitor that. Another thing that I want to talk about, the fifth thing, is selfishness. So people's expectations are unrealistic. That's the sole thing with selfishness in relationships, and why it's hard for some people. People are only concerned about what they will gain out of the situation. And I did a video, or I have a video coming soon, about selfish praying, and how people that say they pray for their partner, are they praying for their partner and that their partner becomes all that they can be, or are they praying for their partner that that partner becomes all that they want them and need them to be? That's selfish praying. If you truly love somebody, you want to see them do good for themselves. If they're doing good for themselves, eventually it's going to trickle over on you. But you're really not concerned about yourself and the benefit that you can get it. You want to make sure that they are really good in life. And a lot of people selfishly pray. Now, again, I've said this in a podcast before. If you're a selfish person and you're single, you know, that's completely different. But you're never going to make it in a relationship being selfish. Your relationship will most definitely be hard if you are a selfish person, because naturally you're just uninterested in what this person has to say, what this person has to offer. So just continue to watch that. If you're in a relationship, you know, how well you are showing the other person that they are important to you and that they're not important for you. So the sixth thing that I want to talk about, and I probably could do a whole podcast on this, but I'm going to try to keep it as minimal as possible. Relationships are hard. And guys, this is not in any order. This is just 10 reasons why I think relationships are difficult. People do not understand the composition of relationships. And what I mean by the composition of relationships is they don't understand how a relationship is structured. So when you get into a relationship, or not get into a relationship, but when you first start out and you meet a person, you have the dating period. Then you have the committed stage period. And then you have ultimately, which is some people's goal, the end goal is marriage. And people don't understand these stages. And that's why they end up skipping steps, and they miss building the proper foundation and all of these things. Like, you have to work the steps in order to have a long-lasting marriage. If you skip anything, it's very seldom things that you can skip and cheat to get ahead in life. And even if you do get ahead, it's not going to feel good because you cheated to get there. But people don't understand that composition. And then within those compositions is a framework to implement those things in a way that works. So in your marriage, there's a framework. I talked about that before. In the committed stage, there's a framework. In the dating stage, there's a framework to manage all of this. And if you want to talk to me one-on-one about that, you can. I'm not going to dig deep into the actual framework, but this is a reason why relationships are hard. I think I have a ton of videos out on that right now, but you can also talk to me one-on-one about it. You're not understanding the composition of relationships. You're not asking the right questions. You're not building on the proper foundation. The seventh thing is technology. Technology has made relationships so difficult to manage for the simple fact of social media. And even phones in general, right? Because think about it, when you go to dinner and it may be you, shout out to my husband Nate, it may be you, and it may be somebody that you see, but what do you see when you in the restaurant? You see people in their cell phones. They're not engaging in conversation. They're not engaging in intimacy, because that is a form of intimacy, talking to one another. And I said last week, social media will have you thinking things about relationships that aren't true. You'll get advice that is inaccurate. You'll hear things that won't sound right to you. But people also use social media for infidelity purposes, as a platform to commit adultery or cheat on their significant other. And this poses the question of, is social media the problem, or are how we use the platform the problem? And I think it's the latter. How we use the platform, how we use technology is the problem. Technology itself is not the problem, because we can use the technology for good. We can use, heck, if you're in a dining room, like I used the other example, if you're in not a dining room, but if you're in a restaurant and you can use your technology as a timer to talk about one thing for 10 minutes. We can use technology in a good way. We just choose not to. And so I think that has caused relationships to be difficult, because it's so easy to use, and it's so easy, again, if you're not listening to the right people and if you're not following the right things, it's so easy to get caught up and directed in a way that isn't helpful for you. So, people tend to have relationships, but they tend not to be in relationships. And this will cause your relationship to be difficult for sure. Relationships require effort. And if you're not implementing effort in your relationship, what comes of that is complications, confusion, turmoil. And the more effort you put in, the more time you create with your partner, the easier it becomes. But you have to put that effort in. And you may think that putting effort in is challenging. You may think that you have to it's some hard thing to do. It's not. But when you have those times where you're arguing because of that lack of effort, a contentious woman, a man who steps out, you'll find that effort is what will make your relationship easier. Naturally showing appreciation, and that's what effort is. It's ultimately showing appreciation to your partner. Appreciation is going to keep your partner doing the good things, because everybody loves positive reinforcement. Everybody loves not necessarily being acknowledged on a grand scale, but everybody loves to be appreciated, especially with the person that you're with. You don't want to be in a relationship with somebody and you're not being appreciated, because it's not going to make you want to stay. It's not going to make you want to do the right things. So you have to be in the relationship, and in order to be in the relationship, you have to put that effort in, a thing that people do not want to do. Ultimately, lack of effort will make your partner think that you are taking them for granted, and you don't want to have your partner feeling like they have been taken for granted, because that's when they check out, and that's when the communication stops. So the ninth thing that I want to talk about is conflict management, and this is a really, really huge one. Again, guys, this is not in some specific order, just 10 things that I thought of that I've seen to make me say why relationships aren't easy. Conflict management. A lot of the times we try to resolve conflict from emotions. And that's when we react instead of responding. And I did a whole video on the difference between responding and reacting. And when you are responding from emotion, you're not thinking clearly. Because a lot of the times, emotions and those feelings are just temporary. Some stimuli cause that in that particular moment. So it's good and that's why I'm a firm believer in checking out of a conversation and tabling a conversation until you can come to yourself, until you can have an adult conversation with your significant other. Another thing too, just to piggyback onto that conflict management and why relationships are hard, is because we lack good communication skills, to include listening. I see all the time people communicating from a place of self-defense, not listening. We communicate, like they say, to react instead of communicating to communicate to understand. Communication includes listening. Communication includes, whether you're watching behaviors, whether you're listening to what they're saying. Like if I'm sitting with my arms crossed, I'm still communicating to you. If I'm rolling my eyes, I'm still communicating with you. If I'm laughing, I'm still communicating with you. And people don't understand these are all communication tools. Now, obviously, the best communication tool is to open your mouth and express yourself, which is a part of the problem. But when we express ourselves, that's when our ego gets in the way, because our ego is telling us that we must be right. We have to be right. And if we're not right, then the whole world is wrong. You know what I'm saying? So you have to be willing to listen, communicate effectively, because conflict management is necessary for your relationship. If you don't have conflict management skills, you're not going to grow individually, and you're not going to get to where you need to be in your relationship. And the last thing that I want to talk about with this subject and why relationships are hard, why I say relationships are hard, and this is the resistance of change. Listen, as I said, from 18 to 34, you better believe I went through some massive changes. My husband, from 21 to, what is he now, 38, he's went through some massive changes. And it's not easy, especially when you're a young person, to navigate change. It's not easy to, I'm a person, I like change, but it's still not the easiest thing to navigate. And change happens in your relationship, whether you are ready for it or whether you are not ready for it. Life can throw some lemons at you that will have you wondering what the heck is going on right now, that will have you questioning everything. And people get past that 5 to 7 year hump, what they say, and they think that they can coast. They think that they don't have to put in a relationship. They think that they know somebody, so they fall off. They think all these things that's not beneficial for them. And you're not realizing that your partner is changing over time. But because you thought you could coast through it, because you thought that you knew them, that's how people outgrow each other. Because you thought you knew them, you are now in a space of what you feel like is this new person, but you never communicated with them. You were never watching them and studying and continuing to study them because you just thought, oh, I can coast through this. Like I said in the opening, things come up to challenge your marriage. No matter how many years that you're in it, things will come up to test you. You're not exempt because you are 10 years in or 20 years in. Resistance of change, and I think I'm going to do a whole separate podcast on this, but resistance to change, I think, is probably the number one thing that causes divorce in relationships. And it's all because we're not talking to our significant other. I think ultimately relationships are difficult because of us, how we perceive things, how we decide to handle them, and how we decide to react to certain stimuli that comes up. I think the success of our relationships, as I often say, starts with us. So if we're having a hard relationship, I think we need to take a look at ourselves. And if you're both taking a look at yourselves, you both can identify. Again, it takes two willing people, two willing individuals to do this. So if you feel like your relationship is suffering, take a look in the mirror. It's not always the other person. It could be, by the way that you are reacting to something, but it's not always the other person that's the problem. It could be how you are responding to them that is causing them to react and causing them to go back into the unconscious mind and bring up something that has traumatized them in the past. So I think the hardships, it starts with us. I think that's a starting place. And how we work together to talk about that as a couple, that's up to you two. That's contingent upon what you want your relationship to be like. So I'm Angie Roll, the teen wife that turned my struggles into strength, marital woes into wins, and made the mistakes so you don't have to. I see you next week when we talk about polyamory versus dating. Is there a difference?